job, a great job. And I mean that. And I must say that I have gotten to know Theresa May much better over the last 2 days than I've known her over the last year and a half.
So what about those Brexit negotiations?
No, well, you can't walk away, because if she walks away, that means she's stuck. You can't walk away. She's a very smart, very tough, very capable person. And I would much rather have her as my friend than my enemy. That I can tell you.
But some words can't be unspoken. His earlier comments unlikely to be forgotten. Alex Forsyth, BBC News.
Yeah, certainly the entourage that is following President Trump very much in damage limitation mode early this morning. In fact, Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, put out a statement as early as the sun dropping saying that he'd said lots of positive things about the Prime Minister as well, and he hadn't said any bad things about her. So you certainly got a sense of that in the press conference, that he was trying not to undermine the Prime Minister. At one point he said, look, I know what I said was tough for the Prime Minister to hear. So maybe behind closed doors they had said to the presidential team, look, you need to put this into context, and we got a lot of that, I think, at the press conference. Let's get the thoughts though of Norman Smith, who is our assistant political editor. Of course, he's at Chequers. Am I right in saying that this really was a walking back exercise, wasn't it, Norman, this afternoon?
Huge change in tone from the president, from the sort of shock and anger that greeted that outburst in the Sun, when he didn't just attack and trash Mrs May's approach to Brexit by extension, he also pretty much challenged her whole leadership, questioning really her sort of authority and ability to deliver the sort of Brexit that people had voted for this afternoon. All changed. The president at his most effusive, emollient, supportive of the Prime Minister, even I think slightly embarrassing Mrs May by the sort of shovel loads of praise he heaped on her, describing her as a remarkable woman, incredible woman, tough negotiator, smart, much rather have her on my side than against me. On and on he went, praising her for the role she'd taken at the NATO summit and standing up to terrorism, standing up to Putin, standing up to Iran. I mean, he could not have been more supportive of Theresa May. And, quite clearly he wanted to make amends, and make amends big time. So this was a major backtrack, if you like, by the president. And on Brexit, likewise, we didn't hear any of that criticism about, maybe she wasn't being tough enough with the EU negotiators. Was she actually going to deliver a real Brexit? As for the thought that he had actually told her what he should do in the negotiations, he said, well, look, I made some suggestions. She thought they were just too brutal. It's her call. So there was none of that really bruising criticism of the morning. And I think the simple truth is they knew they had to try and put the jigsaw back together again, because otherwise the danger was of a full-scale diplomatic rift, a public tussle between the two leaders. And the president said that when he went in to see the Prime Minister this morning, he apologised. Not for himself, I didn't think. He apologised for the way this had been reported. And his explanation was to blame his old favourite, fake news. And so he chided the Sun newspaper for, he said, not fully reporting all the complimentary things he said about Theresa May. But, name of the game here was to try and repair the special relationship after the damage done by Mr. Trump's interview.
Yes, since that press conference, and of course he did go after the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn, but they've just put out a statement, Norman. They say, we stand by our reporting and the quotes we used, including those where the president was positive about the Prime Minister in both the paper and in our audio, because there was, of course, an audio tape. And we're delighted that the president essentially retracted his original charge against the paper later in the press conference. To say the president called us fake news with any serious intent is, well, fake news. But this is what he tends to do, Norman, when he walks himself into trouble, is he blames the reporters who've picked up his comments.
That's extraordinary. It was almost a theme of the news conference, although I have to say most of his barbs at the media seemed destined for the American media. He accused the lady from NBC of dishonest reporting. He flatly refused to take a question from the poor bloke from CNN, saying he was fake news and he was going to take a question from Fox News instead. That's, part of the way he operates. I think the truth probably is that he probably did say some complimentary things about Theresa May, but let's be honest, that's never going to attract much interest from a journalistic point of view. And at the same time, we heard him making those very critical remarks about Mrs May's approach to Brexit, because, as you say, we heard the interview, and he's quite open about it. More than that, he said pretty much the same thing yesterday in Brussels, and at the beginning of the week he also praised Boris Johnson. So this is clearly his view, that Boris Johnson would make a very effective leader, and that Theresa May does need to be tougher in the negotiations, and that there is a danger that she doesn't deliver on the real form of Brexit. And interestingly, while he did say that yes, he was hopeful they would be able to do a trade deal and they wanted to be able to do a trade deal, he also warned about the danger of restrictions. He said, I hope there aren't going to be any restrictions because it's difficult to do trade. And he also went on the attack against the EU, talking about what a bad deal America gets from the EU. And I take it from that actually he hasn't really entirely retreated from his view that if the UK signs up to an EU rulebook, that could well be an issue when it comes to negotiating a trade deal post-Brexit.
Yes, and as you say that, we're looking at a banner which says, where do we go from here? We interviewed Nigel Farage just just half an hour ago, Norman, and I was making the point that those who would be happy with the President's intervention are, of course, those within the European Research Group, the Eurosceptics within the Conservative Party. There is a suggestion that maybe some of them have been speaking to the President's team. Do you get any suggestion about that? Are they briefing the American side about the contents of the white paper?
I'm absolutely sure they talk to like-minded Americans in the Trump administration. Whether any of that percolates through to Donald Trump, let alone has any impact on his views, I would think is pretty questionable. This is a man who speaks his mind, and I doubt very much whether, politicians at Westminster really have much input into the Donald world view. All of which said, his remarks undoubtedly give them more, if you like, mojo, because he has absolutely echoed their core arguments. And, one gets the sense that they are beginning to grow ever more confident that they may be able to force Mrs May to abandon her white paper. Indeed, we know they are now seriously talking about trying to defeat the government on two crucial pieces of Brexit legislation next week, on Monday and Tuesday, by siding with the Labour Party. Now that would be a massive escalation in the sort of guerrilla campaign by the Brexiteers against Mrs May, but they are on a high, they are on a roll, in part fueled by the sort of support they've been given by Donald Trump.
Okay, Norman, for the moment, thank you very much. While you were talking, we were seeing those extraordinary pictures from central London. Let me just show you our pictures here, just outside Henry VIII's gate at Windsor Castle. You can see it's much more modest, more genteel, in keeping with the Royal Borough of Windsor, but certainly a good many people here, and some of the same sort of placards that you've seen on the streets of London there. Very visible police presence. In fact, if we stay on these pictures, what you're going to see are the guards coming up the road. The Coldstream Guards 1st Battalion will be the honour guard in the quadrangle when Donald Trump arrives here in just over 20 minutes' time. And the guards. 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, one of the oldest units in the British Army, of course, and have worked alongside American units in Iraq and also in various counter-terrorism operations over the years as well. So Donald Trump will be familiar. In fact, this morning they were at a military exhibition this morning at Sandhurst. They were watching US and British special forces in a counter-terrorism operation, a mock operation, before they went off to Chequers. So he's going to see plenty of the pomp and ceremony when he gets here to Windsor. There go the guards up the castle, and you'll see above the round tower in Windsor Castle that the Royal Standard is flying, which means that the Queen, of course, is in her private apartment and waiting for the President to arrive. Let's cross then to Westminster. Anita McVeigh is there watching these protests. Extraordinary pictures, Anita.
Really are, Christian. We're just seeing the Metropolitan Police are tweeting, in fact, that Trafalgar Square is so full that it's actually approaching capacity. And for anyone who's been to Trafalgar Square, the landmark square in the centre of London, you'll know it's a very big area, but the Metropolitan Police saying that that is approaching capacity and they may pause the march to control the flow of people coming in. That's the Stop Trump protest, along with the various other protests, the coalition of opposition, if you like, to Donald Trump's visit to the United Kingdom. It's pretty quiet behind me now in Parliament Square, where one of the earlier marchers arrived. And of course it was here earlier that we saw the Trump blimp, the Trump baby balloon as well. But I suspect that many of the people who were here a little earlier have gone towards Trafalgar Square. So yes, a day of protest, a big day of protest. We're waiting on official figures really to find out how many people are involved, but certainly in the tens of thousands. Well, with me to talk a little bit more about what we've been seeing today, I have Dr. Clodagh Harrington, Senior Lecturer in